The idea behind this exercise is to take text data that's actually spatial data in some respects, but it's being represented in more of a spreadsheet database form. So this is spatial data in a sense because you can see that the data values here are organized by state. And so the trick then is if we want to view these data spatially, then we need to associate these variables here, median income from 2007 to 2008, as a 2-year average, and associate that with the spatial feature that is represented by the polygon of Alabama, and then do that for the rest of the 50 states. So the first step is to take this spreadsheet and understand how to clean it up and get it into a format that ArcMap likes. And basically that involves creating a spreadsheet, or it can be a text file also, that has the first row is the variable name, and then the successive rows are each corresponding data record, and each column is a variable, and one of those columns is the one-to-one link between the record in the spatial feature database, and one corresponds to the corresponding record in the spreadsheet. So in this case, our one-to-one link between these two data sets, the spatial data set and the spreadsheet, is this column here, and then these are the columns of data, but there's a few problems that we need to clean up. One is we need to get rid of these records up top here, these rows up top that have just notes. We need to clean up the variable names. There's spaces in here, and this superscript value. There's an extra kind of hidden column here that we need to delete, and so we really just kind of want to reduce the data set down to the data itself in a clean set of rows and columns with just one record at the top that has the variable names. So this is the outcome of that cleaning up procedure. You can see here in the first row at the top I've got state name as the revised name for the variable that it contains the name of states, and then I've changed the variable names for each of those variables in the spreadsheet to a shortened string with no spaces, and taking out the superscripts and plus signs and the parentheses and so on. So just making what is a variable name with no spaces in it is the key for naming the variables. And I got rid of everything at the bottom here too, so I just have a series of 52 records, 52 because there's data in here for the District of Columbia, and then there's one row for the variable names. Now here's a spatial data set for states in the United States. I can quickly look at the attribute table here, and I can see that I've got a series of 48 records. I actually, just to make it a more condensed data set, I got rid of Hawaii and Alaska. But the variable name that I've got in this data set that corresponds to the state is called name here, and note that it's left justified here, which means that this is a text field here. And there's a series of other variables out here, but what I'm effectively going to do is take the variables from that spreadsheet and tack them on to the right side of this attribute table for the spatial data set. So to do that, I first need to add the spreadsheet to my ArcMap document here, and I do that using this Add Data button. And then I navigate and select the spreadsheet here, and here's this XLS file, and now I need to stop because the software keeps crashing on me, so I'm going to just simply add this by adding the worksheet that has that data in it from the spreadsheet. Now I've got that spreadsheet loaded in my table of contents here. I can right-click on it and open it just in the same way that I open attribute tables with other data sets, spatial data sets, and I can see that it imported nice and cleanly. So here's my state name variable here, left justified. Obviously these are text elements here, so I know it's a text field. But just a reminder that left justified in these tables means that it's a text field. Right justified means that it's a numeric field. And here are the variables that were part of that spreadsheet here. I don't see any strange things. I do have one record down here that says null. This is because there is probably some record in my spreadsheet that was tagged on the end where I had some spaces or something. And here are some also some null variables at the end. Again, I probably had a few spaces or something in the cells at the right side of that spreadsheet that meant that it tried to recognize those as variables. But everything imported nice and cleanly. Note here that the values I have for the variables are floating point values. They looked like they were integer values in the spreadsheet, but that was just because of formatting. They were actually floating point data with, it looks like 6 decimal points. Just to clarify that there's a difference in precision in what you see in this imported version, but the data was actually more precise than the integer values appeared in the spreadsheet. Okay, so now the trick is to just simply join the data from the variables here in the spreadsheet to my attribute table here for United States. And the tool to do that is found by right-clicking on the data set in the table of contents and going to Joins and Relates, and then you have these two options, Join and Relate. Now just a quick word, there's a slight difference. Let me explain the difference between what a join is and a relate is. Basically a join is the tool that you want to use when you have a one-to-one link between the record in your spatial data set and the record in your tabular data. If you've got a one-to-many or a many-to-many link between the spatial data set and the tabular data, then you want to use a relate. So in this case, we've got a one-to-one link. We've got one record in our tabular data that corresponds to individual record in our spatial data set. The state is the link here. But we might have an alternative kind of arrangement where we've got a series of point features, for example, in a spatial data set, and I've got maybe values of well depth or something, and then I want to simply associate those with some other values, but I've got a many-to-many link based on some category of well depth. And so different kinds of joining require using either the join tool or the relate tool. But the help has a pretty good explanation of scenarios when you want to use join and relate, so just take a look at that. In this case here, again, I want to use the join. The other thing that I want to emphasize is that when you use the join tool here in ArcMap, it doesn't permanently join the tabular data to that spatial data set. When you quit ArcMap, it will, the next time you load that spatial data set, you won't see the joined variables at the end of that data set. So in order to really save the result of that join, you've got to export the data set. And I'll do that at the end, but I just want to mention it now to emphasize it. So let me do that join step now. And this is the dialog box here. So there's really just 3 things to enter. One is the name of the field in the spatial data set that the join is based on. The second thing is the name of the tabular data set. In this case, I've only got 2 things loaded in my table of contents, so ArcMap is really smart and it loads it that second element, data element, automatically. And then the third is the name of the variable in the tabular data set that the join will be based on. So you might remember that the name of the variable here in my input data set, my spatial data set, is name. I actually called it state name in my tabular data set, and so I'll just use this pull down menu and select those variables as the linking between the spatial data set and the tabular data set. And here's the result of selecting those pull down menus here. I've got name here, here's the name of my spreadsheet, and here's the name of the variable in that spreadsheet that corresponds to the name attribute in my spatial data set. Alright, so I just clicked OK in that tool, and I can look at my attribute table here for my spatial data set. And if I scroll to the right now, basically from here to the right are all those variables or those attributes from that spreadsheet, from that tabular data spreadsheet. So here's my median income in 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, and so on. And here it actually adds in that state name here for the linking variable that it grabbed from that spreadsheet. But the key with these links is that it can be quite tricky with text fields. So you've got to make sure that, in this case, we're working with the state names, which are pretty systematic. You know, a single space between the word South and the word Dakota. In this case, the single space between District of Columbia. So in this case, it's pretty straightforward to do this kind of link. It doesn't always work out quite so cleanly. You need to be really careful with text fields when you're linking, because of little things like a trailing space at the end can mean that a link isn't created, or a preceding space at the beginning of a variable that you don't see necessarily. So it can be hidden in there, and it can mean a link isn't made between two individual records. So you got to be pretty careful sometimes, and there are ways to control the software so you can see which records actually successfully were joined and which ones didn't join successfully. If you've got a record in your database that existed in your spatial database that it didn't make a link to, it'll basically fill in every single variable with null. And that's your signal that it didn't find a record in the tabular data set that it was able to link to the record in the spatial data set. But in this case, I've got good data for every one of my variables here, for every one of my real variables, and so I'm ready to now map my data set using these variables here. I'll do that quickly. So I've now just made a quick map of the variable median income, 2-year average from 2007 to 2008. And so you can see how it's able to take the spatial data and use it to symbolize the features here. Now again, the important thing to remember is that this is not a permanent joined set of attributes onto the United States attribute table. This is a temporary join. It's saved in my ArcMap document. If I save this ArcMap document and then reopen it, it'll add these two same elements to my data table of contents, and this join will be there. But if I actually look at the attribute table for the spatial data set in a new ArcMap session, I won't see the joined attributes. So in order to really permanently save the results of this join, for example, if you wanted to email this data set to somebody else, you need to right-click on the data set here, and then choose Data, and then Export Data, and export it as a geodatabase or export it as a shapefile. Then that output data set will have the permanently joined attributes at the end of that tabular attribute table, at the end of that spatial data set attribute table.